When a cocky cop tried to show off his power to Shaquille O'Neal, he thought his badge made him unstoppable. But power can make fools blind. Seconds later, he was disarmed, embarrassed, and given a harsh lesson in respect by the last man you'd ever want to challenge. Before we jump in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. It was a perfect spring afternoon at Liberty State Park in New Jersey, the kind of day where everything feels just right. Families spread out their picnic blankets on the soft green grass. Kids chased butterflies while birds filled the air with their sweet chirping, singing from century-old oak trees. Under the biggest oak in the park, sitting on an old wooden bench, was a man who didn't need an introduction. Shaquille O'Neal, dressed in his signature denim shirt and cowboy hat, sat quietly, tossing bits of food to the pigeons from a small paper bag. He didn't demand respect, he simply had it. His calm presence stood out in the middle of the lively park, but peace never lasts when pride and power clash. Officer Chris Hochul was patrolling the park that day, his polished boots crunching against the gravel with every step. People in the area knew him as the park tyrant, a man who had turned a simple security job into his personal kingdom. When Hochul spotted Shaq on the bench, a smug grin crossed his face. He had no clue that his next move would change his life forever. What Hochul didn't realize was that people had already complained about him. Just that morning, 3 different families had reported him for being too aggressive. An elderly woman said he threatened to arrest her for feeding the ducks. A young dad said Hochul kicked his kids off the playground just for being a little too loud, but his badge and growing ego made him think he was untouchable. Hochul had joined the park police 5 years ago after failing to become a real officer. His trainers at the academy had warned about his habit of pushing people around. That was their polite way of saying he loved to throw his weight around. But here, in the park, he had found the perfect place to show off his authority. As he walked toward Shaq's bench, his hand rested on his baton. The afternoon sun reflected off his badge, sending flashes of light across the park. A group of teens lowered their phones, sensing that something was about to go down. A young mother quickly gathered her kids, recognizing that walk, the same strut Hochul used when he ruined their birthday picnic last month. Shaquille kept feeding the pigeons, acting like he didn't even notice. But if you looked closely, you might have caught something in his eyes. A quiet awareness, like a martial arts master sensing an attack before it even happens. Hochul stopped right in front of him, making sure his shadow covered Shaq completely. The pigeons scattered, but Shaq didn't move an inch. His rough hands held the last few breadcrumbs. What happened next would turn into a story people would tell in this park for years. Officer Hochul cleared his throat loudly, but Shaquille didn't look up. "Sir," Hochul barked, stretching the word out like he was pretending to be polite. "This bench is for people actively using the park. No loitering." Shaquille slowly lifted his eyes to meet Hochul. "I'm not loitering, officer. I'm actively feeding these birds." He nodded toward the pigeons hopping around excitedly. "And they seem pretty active to me." Hochul's face tightened. "Don't get smart with me, old man. You think this is funny?" "No, sir," Shaquille said calmly. "But these birds might." A few people nearby chuckled, which only made Hochul angrier. He leaned in, trying to look tough. "Listen here," he said. "I don't care who you think you are. When I give an order, people follow it." Shaquille adjusted his cowboy hat just a little. "You know, officer, I've learned that people who have to tell others how important they are usually aren't." The crowd around them had grown. Phones were out, recording everything. Someone whispered, "Is that really him?" Another voice answered, "That cop has no idea who he's messing with." Hochul's hand tightened around his baton. "Last warning," he growled. "Move, now." Shaquille calmly reached into his bag and pulled out another handful of breadcrumbs. "Officer, I respect the law, but right now, the only thing disturbing the peace in this park is your attitude." Hochul's face went from red to purple. No one had ever challenged him like this before, especially not so calmly. He was used to yelling matches, not quiet confidence. His patience snapped. With a sharp metallic sound, he yanked out his baton. Stand up, now. Shaquille stayed seated. His voice was soft but steady. You might want to rethink that. Not for my sake. For yours. Hochul swung his baton at Shaquille's shoulder, a move he'd used many times to show who was in charge. But this time was different. Without even seeming to try, Shaquille caught the baton in midair. He held it tight. Hochul yanked, but it wouldn't budge. What the? Let go! Hochul sputtered, his face burning with embarrassment. Shaquille didn't move. Son, he said, still holding the baton, there are 3 things you need to know right now. First, that badge gives you responsibility, not power. Second, I've spent more time training in martial arts than you've spent on this earth. And third, he let go of the baton with a small smile. You really should have Googled me before starting this. A teenager in the crowd shouted, That's Shaquille O'Neal, man. He's a legend. Hochul's embarrassment turned into rage. He shoved his baton away and grabbed his taser instead. On your feet. You're under arrest for assaulting an officer. Shaquille finally stood. His movements were slow, controlled. Officer, we both know that's not true. Just like we both know there's no rule against feeding pigeons in this park. Shut up! Hochul's hands shook as he aimed the taser. I said you're under arrest. An older woman in the crowd called out, Somebody call the real police. This has gone too far. Shaquille didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Hochul. Young man, he said, I've faced armed terrorists who are calmer than you are right now. Why don't we both take a deep breath and talk about what's really bothering you? Hochul's finger tightened on the taser's trigger, but something in Shaquille's steady gaze made him stop. At that moment, when everything felt uncertain, he made his biggest mistake yet. He reached for his gun. The crowd gasped as Hochul pulled out his service weapon. Even the birds flew away, leaving the park in eerie silence. Last chance? Hochul's voice shook a little. Get on the ground, old man. Shaquille didn't move. His face stayed calm, but his eyes changed. He looked at Hochul the way a teacher looks at a student making a huge mistake. You know what's interesting about guns, officer? Shaquille's voice was casual, like they were just talking about the weather. They make people feel powerful. But real power? He took a step forward. Real power is knowing when not to use it. Stay back! Hochul's hand trembled. I said stay back. Or what? Shaquille asked softly. You'll shoot an unarmed man in front of all these people? For feeding pigeons? A drop of sweat ran down Hochul's forehead. In all his years of bullying people at the park, no one had ever stood up to him like this. No one had ever looked this unafraid. I'm not playing around, Hochul stammered. Neither am I. Before anyone could blink, Shaquille moved. In an instant, Hochul's gun was in pieces on the ground, and Shaquille was standing right where he had been before, like he had never moved at all. Hochul stared at his empty hand, his mouth hanging open. What did you... Shaquille simply said, 30 years of martial arts. But more importantly, 40 years of knowing when not to use them. The crowd was completely silent. Even the kids playing nearby had stopped, sensing they were watching something important. You have 2 choices now, son, Shaquille continued. You can keep making this worse, or you can stop and think. Why did you feel the need to pull a gun on a man feeding birds? Before Hochul could answer, a strong voice cut through the tension. Hochul, stand down now! 2 senior officers rushed over, hands near their holsters. The older one, Captain Holloway, took one look at Shaquille and his eyes widened. Mr. O'Neal, sir, Holloway said respectfully. Then, turning to Hochul, he snapped, Officer Hochul, what do you think you're doing? Hochul pointed wildly at Shaquille. He attacked me. He took my weapon. After you pulled it on me, for feeding pigeons, Shaquille said calmly. Don't forget that part. Holloway looked down at the broken gun, then back at Hochul. You pulled your weapon. Over bird feeding? He wouldn't listen. Hochul's voice was almost a squeak now. He was loitering. And loitering? Holloway cut him off. That's not even a real offense in this park. We've talked about this, Hochul, many times. The second officer, Johnson, was already gathering witness statements. Sir, he called to Holloway, I've got at least 12 people saying Officer Hochul started this for no reason, plus about 20 videos. And it's Shaquille O'Neal, for heaven's sake! Holloway rubbed his temples. The Shaquille O'Neal, the man who's trained half the law enforcement in Texas. Hochul's face went from red to pale. I didn't know. Badge and gun, Holloway said, holding out his hand. Right now. As Hochul slowly unpinned his badge, Shaquille spoke up. Captain, may I say something? Holloway turned to him with respect. Of course, sir. I don't think your officer here is a bad person, Shaquille said thoughtfully. Just someone who's lost his way. The crowd kept growing, with people filming and whispering to each other. Some were already posting videos online, their excited chatter filling the air. Lost his way? Hochul scoffed weakly. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think, Shaquille replied. I see a man who probably dreamed of making a difference when he first put on that uniform. But somewhere along the way, you started mixing up respect with fear. Several people in the crowd nodded. An elderly woman stepped forward. He threatened to arrest my grandson last week just for skateboarding. And my kids, another parent added, for laughing too loud. Hochul's shoulders slumped as more people spoke up. Each complaint seemed to drain the fight out of him. The truth of his actions was finally sinking in. The thing about fear, Shaquille continued, his voice strong in the now quiet park, is that it's like a boomerang. Use it against others, and it'll come right back to you. I saw it in your eyes when you pulled that gun. You were scared. I wasn't scared, Hochul muttered, but his voice wasn't convincing. Everyone gets scared, Shaquille said. The brave ones admit it. The wise ones learn from it. Captain Holloway watched closely. He had expected chaos. Instead, he was seeing something different, a moment of change. Shaquille turned to him. You know, in my years of teaching martial arts, I've seen this before. Sometimes the most aggressive students become the best ones, once they learn to control their energy. Hochul looked up, confused. What are you talking about? I'm talking about second chances, Shaquille said. Captain, instead of firing him, what if Officer Hochul went through extra training? Maybe some martial arts classes to learn discipline. Some community service to reconnect with the people he's supposed to protect? Holloway considered this. Mr. O'Neal, after what he just pulled. I know, Shaquille interrupted gently. But think about it. What helps the community more? Firing him and letting his anger grow? Or helping him become the officer he was meant to be? Hochul stared at Shaquille, confused. Why would you help me? I tried to... Because 30 years ago, I was a lot like you, Shaquille admitted. Angry. Always trying to prove myself. Then I had a teacher who showed me a better way. Sometimes that's all a person needs. The crowd had gone quiet, taking in this unexpected moment. The same elderly woman from before spoke up. If Mr. O'Neal thinks he deserves a chance, well, I suppose we could too. Captain Holloway nodded slowly. It would mean a demotion, mandatory counseling, and complete retraining. And, Shaquille added with a small smile, I know a good dojo in the area. The instructor there owes me a favor. Hochul's eyes filled with emotion. I don't deserve this. No, Shaquille agreed. But that's what grace is. The real question is, are you willing to do the work? Hochul's retraining wouldn't be easy. Captain Holloway laid out the terms, 6 months of probation, starting at the lowest rank. Weekly counseling sessions, community service every weekend, And most importantly, martial arts training with Shaquille's recommended instructor, a tough Marine veteran. And Hosul, Holloway added sternly, one more complaint about power abuse, just one, and you're not just fired. You'll be facing charges. Those videos won't disappear. The crowd seemed satisfied with this justice. Lots of people were already sharing videos with captions like Shaquille O'Neal teaches corrupt cop a lesson and instant karma for park bully. Shaquille picked up the scattered pieces of Hochul's gun from the ground and put them back together like an expert. But instead of giving it back to Hochul, he handed it to Holloway. He'll get this back when he's ready. If he's ready, Holloway corrected. Shaquille walked back to his bench and grabbed his bag of birdseed. The pigeons, now sensing that things had calmed down, slowly returned. Hochul stood there awkwardly. Without his badge and gun, his uniform felt heavier than ever. "Officer Hochul," Shaquille called out, still focused on the pigeons. "One more thing." "Yes, sir?" "Every morning for the next 6 months, before your shift starts, you'll be cleaning this park. Every piece of trash, every leaf. And while you're at it, you might want to think about how many people you bullied here. Each one of them deserves a personal apology." Word spread fast about what happened that day in Liberty State Park. The videos went viral, showing not just Shaquille's impressive move, but also his surprising mix of justice and wisdom. The story became something of a local legend. Hochul did show up the next morning at dawn, trash bag in hand, and every morning after that. Sometimes early joggers saw him practicing martial arts moves between picking up litter. He was clumsy at first, but little by little he got better. The angry strut he used to have was gone. Now he walked with more care, more focus. Shaquille would stop by from time to time, quietly feeding his pigeons while Hochul worked. No words were needed. The lesson had already been learned. Sometimes the strongest hits don't come from fists or weapons. They come from simple acts of justice and mercy. The park changed too. Families returned. Kids played freely again. Even the pigeons seemed calmer. The park's bully was gone. And in his place, a humbled man was slowly earning back his respect. One piece of trash, one apology, and one martial arts lesson at a time. If you liked this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, true strength isn't about how much power you have, it's about how you choose to use it. Share your thoughts about this encounter in the comments. This is Rogan, and I'll see you in the next video.